What is going on, fellas? It's your boy Gsluke here with a Monday Night Football preview for the showdown slate between the Bengals and the Browns, two of the AFC North teams that are actually in playoff contention, and then you've got the Ravens, of course, in squarely in that sort of situation too. And then my Pittsburgh Steelers, just the gutter at this point, basement of the AFC North. But you're looking at two competitive teams, which makes for an intriguing showdown slate. You've got Jamar Chase sidelined for quite some time. David Njoku for the Browns, also not going to be playing tonight. So there's shares in each of the offenses that are up for grabs. So definitely a little bit of a mystery as to how they're going to be distributed. I'd say the Njoku shares a little bit more straightforward than the Jamar Chase shares, just because he demands such a large share of that offense's volume. So there's going to be a lot of moving parts tonight, perhaps adjustments being made from the Browns during the game and the Bengals to try and account for some of the differences there. So a lot to talk about here. So we'll talk about some of the game scripts I like, of course, the injury situations, and then just a player-by-player analysis of what you need to know for tonight's game. That is enough rambling, though. We got to get this thing started. Let's go ahead and get this thing rocking. Alrighty, got our projections up, and the first thing we'll touch on is the game environment. You got a slight favorites here for the Bengals. They've been the sharper team to this point of the year. Jacoby Brissett leading the Browns has been, I'd say, about average in terms of their efficiency. I mean, they haven't been opponent offense, but they're certainly not holding back their team. Their defense just hasn't been as sharp or as potent as we've seen over the last few years. Their pass rush isn't nearly as lethal as it was last year with the Myles Garrett. And their secondary, though it has a few solid smash players, I'd say splash players, probably the better word for it, they just aren't holding up enough. Like, their talent level is a lot better than what their production has been to this point. So I expect that to come back, for them to figure it out. Maybe it's scheme change, whatever the case may be. It's a little bit more nuanced than I can take on here. You're looking at two teams that should put up a lot of points here, and that is reflected with the total. It's much higher than what you've seen in past years in this sort of matchup. I mean, when we get to AFC North opponents, usually we see the defenses stand up and it be, let's say, a 35, maybe a 40-point total game. So I would normally lean towards the under here. Recent trends would dictate otherwise, but I'll just say, I'll put the narrative out there just for you to maybe consider, right? You don't have to, play this like I am tonight. Might be a little bit of a lower scoring affair than we think. Now, I don't think it's going to be the sort of game where defenses and kickers are absolutely dominating it, but I wouldn't be surprised if you saw one or two of them, maybe one defense, one kicker, get into the optimal by the end of the night. But more importantly, the possession volume-based players just exceeding all of the other expectations. I don't think we're going to see a ton of these splash plays where guys at $3,000 or less, $200 as pure punts are going to get there in a meaningful fashion. It feels like your good old standard showdown slate where on a primetime game, we get a little bit of underperforming performances from each team, right? Teams that are a little bit stale or a little bit sour, as opposed, because let's admit it, right? To this point of the year, primetime games have been disappointing at the very best, and I really think that this is a situation where we might see that same sort of thing. Just, again, historically, these AFC North matchups tend to be lower scoring. You tend to have a little bit more of a defensive output from each team, and I kind of see it happening again. They're very familiar with one another. The Browns defense, I think, is just underperforming based on their talent level. And on the other side, Joe Burrow is without Jamar Chase now, so it's not like he's going to be at full efficiency. They're going to have to figure out how the offense morphs now that they don't have Chase in there. And on the flip side, Jacoby Brissett, like I said, he just hasn't been great to this point, right? He's just been about average for the entire year. I think that you could see a lot of unders hitting in terms of like a prop market. And if you're in terms of expectations over here, like 20 fantasy points, 16, 17, it's not like I'm projecting players for much lower than their typical expectations. But I think that I'd shade towards like the under on most of these projections. I really think the game script is going to be a little bit more rushing heavy. I mean, with Nick Chubb, Kareem Hunt, we know the Browns are going to rush the ball. And on the flip side, without Jamar Chase, I think that Joe Mixon's going to get a ton of touches. So let's start with the running backs. I think that Nick Chubb and Joe Mixon are my top plays on the slate. They're also not getting the most ownership. If you're looking for the chalk, it's going to be Joe Burrow and T. Higgins. T. Higgins is nearly 70% owned between both the flex and the captain slot, and then Joe Burrow is above 76% owned between both spots. So if you're looking for your pure chalk, it's going to be the passing offense of the Bengals, because people see Jamar Chase leaving the lineup and they're taking most of that usage and spreading it over T. Higgins, Tyler Boyd, and a few of the players towards the bottom of the board that we'll talk about, including Hayden Hurst at tight end. So There are a lot of players that are getting boosts in terms of their volume for this game, but if it's still a low efficiency game in general, right, you're not talking about more than 40 points being scored. If that's the narrative I'm going with, which is what I'm siding towards as of right now, there's not going to be all that much opportunity to sustain 3-4 wide receivers. You might have one or two of them go off. Maybe it's T. Higgins tonight. Maybe it's a Tyler Boyd or Hayden Hurst, right? But outside of that, I don't know if I see 2 or 3 of those wide receivers getting there. And just based on their price tag, right, $8,000, $6,400, Hayden Hurst is $5,200, their projections in terms of points per dollar are jumping off the board, right, because of that opportunity increase. I mean, in fact, right, T. Higgins is nearly a 20-point projection now. 11.8 for Tyler Boyd is more significant than what he's had for the entire year. 9.4 for Hayden Hurst, a tight end. That's, a top 5, top 10 tight end this week in general in terms of his fantasy point prediction. So Hayden Hurst, just all of these options are going to be a lot higher owned than they probably should be. I mean, Hurst I have at 22%, so maybe he's the most reasonable. But Boyd, right, nearly 50% between both positions. Higgins, I already said, over 75%. And even somebody down low like a Mike Thomas is 23% owned there at the flex spot. So you're looking at a lot of ownership that's flat across the board. I don't necessarily think that it's fair, though. I think it's going to be a relatively low-scoring game. And the running backs, like I was kind of like starting to touch on here, are the guys that I want to get to. We know they're going to sustain volume. We know that Nick Chubb's going to probably score right around 15 to 20 fantasy points every single game. And even in losing game scripts now, he's getting all of that production, all of those touches, because that's the identity of this Browns offense. Joe Mixon on the same sort of fortune, right? He's a little bit more involved through the air, which you have to love, especially in a lower scoring game where a lot of your points are going to come through PPR production. So those are the players that I'm prioritizing. I'm taking in most of my lineups. I love them at captain. I like Jacoby Brissett's price. He's $9,200. He's another player that I'm comfortable getting to at the captain slot a few times. He's not going to be like 20-30% owned for me at captain, but I'm going to take him at 7 to 10% because I do see an avenue for him getting to the optimal. Rushing touchdowns are going to be the name of the game for Brissett, but given his large frame, when they get down to the red zone, a lot of times they do go with Nick Chubb, which is why his touchdown props are through the roof in terms of the juice at this point, why he projects so well in terms of touchdowns week to week. But Jacoby Brissett is more than capable of vulturing those touchdowns. So, I'm going to be heavy on Nick Chubb tonight, so I'll self-admittedly say that, especially because they're the underdog team. They're going to be lower owned. I think that if you're going to go with an onslaught, it almost has to be the Browns, because if they go out there and pull off the upset at home, Nick Chubb is going to be way under-owned compared to the sort of production that he'd be accounting for in that sort of game script. So those are the sort of plays I like into, but I like Jacoby Brissett too, because if he ends up vulturing, especially if it's 2 touchdowns on the ground, which is completely within his range of outcomes. He's that sort of running back, especially it's like a Josh Allen, right? They can rush for 2 touchdowns. You see it all the time. Even a Tom Brady will have a multiple touchdown game every once in a while. He rushes for that 1-yard touchdown seemingly once every like 3-4 games at this point. Brissett is that same sort of guy. So don't hate him at captain. T. Higgins, you got to play him. I mean, he's like I said, 70% owned between the 2 positions there. But I think it's warranted, right? He's way too cheap. Amari Cooper, though, even cheaper, $7,600. And though his projection isn't nearly as high as a T. Higgins, I think he still has the upside, particularly if he can get into the end zone. And when you're playing Showdown, I'm willing to overlook single player projections, right? Like my projections, my system has them at 19.2 points, which is, again, the best points per dollar play of anybody in that middle to high tier range of anybody out there. You can see at the top, right, 1.8x on Joe Burrow. That's pretty decent, but 2.4x there on a T. Higgins. Like I said, you almost like have to play him, but maybe you just fade him at the captain slot, right? You make him somebody that you're mixing into mid 60, maybe 75% of your flex spot, so you're getting leverage there, but you fade him at captain and hope that somebody else has that really big splash performance. Maybe it's a cheaper captain, right? Like an Amari Cooper, for example, on the other side, that slightly outperforms a T. Higgins. Like, that's still more than capable. Sure, T. Higgins is going to do it a lot more often, but he's more than twice as owned as Amari Cooper at the captain slot. So those are the sort of things that you have to consider. Tyler Boyd, I think, could also take a lot of production away from a T. Higgins. So if you're taking Tyler Boyd at captain, maybe you want to just fade T. Higgins altogether at the flex spot, just hoping that Tyler Boyd is soaking up those red zone touches. Kareem Hunt is reportedly on the trade block, so I don't know how much he's going to play. That's reflected in his ownership, though. You can see he's only 18.3% owned. So if you're looking for leverage, Kareem Hunt's your guy. He can definitely score you a touchdown or two, much like a Jacoby Brissett can steal touchdowns from a Nick Chubb out there. Hayden Hurst, love him. I think that a lot of people are going to flock to a T. Higgins and a Tyler Boyd, which is deservingly so, right? They're wide receivers with Jamar Chase's departure. But Hayden Hurst could also soak up a lot of those touches. So $5,200, I think that he's being underutilized by the field. Donovan Peoples-Jones is always worth a home run play threat. So, I'm kind of considering taking my Kareem Hunt ownership and just moving it to Donovan Peoples-Jones. So that is still TBA, to be determined, we'll say. And I just want to throw it out there, right? If you're looking for access to these projections directly, they are on my Patreon page. And as they change throughout the day, you'll also get updates there too, right? So obviously these ownership numbers are reflective as of right now, which is here at right around 4 p.m. But as we get closer to lock, ownership matures, there'll be updates with that. And then after the actives list comes out, we actually know who's playing. A lot changes, right? Because then we have to redistribute a lot of the ownership. So stay tuned to all of that. If you want access to that, that is on the Patreon, like I said, and there is a link in the description of the video to get access to it. But Donovan Peoples-Jones is a likely candidate to get added to the player pool. I'm not a huge P. Ryan guy. He's got to get there with a receiving touchdown, maybe get you 4 or 5 catches in a losing game script. So I think if you're going to play P. Ryan, maybe you play him in a Browns heavy stack, like a 4-2 or a 5-1 Browns stack, because you're hoping that he's on the field when they're playing from, again, like 2-3 touchdowns behind and they have to pass the ball 24/7. He's going to play a lot more often than Mixon in that sort of situation. McPherson's one of the best kickers, if not the best kicker in the league. I always love playing him. And perhaps because I'm kind of fading the Bengals, you can kind of get a feel for that tonight, right? Maybe it's because they're kicking field goals. Because of going out there and scoring, instead of going out there and scoring touchdowns, McPherson would be a direct beneficiary. So if I'm going with that kind of game script, I got to play him. Harrison Bryant is the guy that I really love as value on the Browns because Njoku is out. He's going to see most of the targets that Njoku typically would out there. And Bryant was already a pretty big figure in this offense. So $4,000, he's actually a little bit underpriced. I project him for 7.5 points. That's not all that much different than Hayden Hurst, right? And he's actually solid $1,200 cheaper too. I love both of the plays. I think they're both solid options here. And in fact, Harrison Bryant may actually get into the captain poll a little bit later because all he's got to do is score 2 touchdowns. He's not going to get us like 120 yards receiving. Heck, if he does, that'd be awesome, right? It'd be like a career performance for him. He's got more touchdown equity, which is what you're kind of looking for with Bryant. Also really cheap. Gives you a lot of flexibility to fit in both quarterbacks potentially. Maybe taking a guy like a T. Higgins and a Joe Mixon together, you could, get to those top-end options, top-end stacks if you do that. Mike Thomas, though, $1,200. He's going to see significant playing time because Chase is out. He's going to be the de facto number 3 wide receiver. So $1,200, you're getting a lot of value. It's only projecting for right around 5 points, so it's not like he's going off there, but worth a few looks in large field GPPs. And then Pharaoh Brown, too. So he's going to be, at least for what I'm expecting, the number 2 receiving tight end for the Cleveland Browns. And up until this point, I kind of mentioned it already, Njoku was getting a lot of snaps. He was putting up a lot of fantasy production. But Harrison Bryant was also involved in the offense, playing plenty of snaps, getting looks from Jacoby Brissett as well. So if Pharaoh Brown moves into, the number 2 tight end role, kind of what, somebody like a Bryant was doing for the entire season, then $200, he could pay that off, get you like 3-4 catches. I mean, let alone if he scores a touchdown, right? Then you're looking at the pure nuts at $200. I think he's definitely worth a look too. I mean, I like Mike Thomas more. I think he's got a much higher snap share, much more opportunity than somebody like Pharaoh Brown, but Pharaoh Brown's also $200. So you're paying essentially nothing from one of your roster spots. And if he scores a touchdown, you're going to be really happy that you got to him. All right, boys, that is all I've got for the Monday Night Football preview. Before you hop out of here, go ahead and smash that like button if you enjoyed the video. And also go ahead and comment down below who you've got as your top captain play. For me, it's got to be Nick Chubb. I love the fact that he's being underutilized. And if I expect the Browns to be a little bit more competitive tonight than the public does, then he's just got to be somebody that you're getting to. So that's going to be what I'm taking. But go ahead and let me know what you're thinking down in the comments. Until next time, guys, best of luck with all of your lineups, all of your outright bets or props if you're going in that direction. But until next time, like I said, best of luck. And make sure you are subscribed to the channel so you don't miss our content for Thursday Night Football. All of our live streams in the future. Going to be doing more and more main slate content throughout the year, particularly as golf goes into its off season. While both sports are going on, it's hard to juggle both. I can't do a full content load for either sport. But when golf goes into its quote unquote off season, that's like the first week of December, something like that. There stops being weekly events. We'll be all in on the NFL. So there'll be even more content posted daily, pretty much a video every day for NFL at that point. Just, obviously putting out what I can here, right? So when there's both sports going on, kind of got to consolidate what we're doing for each end, but hopefully covering everything that you guys need there. But again, till next time, guys, best of luck with all of your lineups. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any of that content, and let's get this cash.